Shalom Aleichem. A good night of Shabbos. Today's Erev Shabbos Kedesh Pashas Tetzaveh. Asara Yomam L'Chedesh Adarishin Hey Tov Shin Pei Beis. And as is our custom, on Fridays we're learning a Maimer Chassidus. And today we're actually learning a Maimer from our regular year. The last couple of weeks I did a Maimer from Tafshin Yutes. I had a taiva to do also the Purim Maimer, which is quite famous and verbringed about much. But I feel like I should go back to the regular year because in other Sheini, in other bays in Tafshin Lamed Vav, there were many Maimorim. So we'll see. If there'll be an opportunity, I'll do the Purim Maimer from Yutes as well. But in the meantime, we had 2 extra weeks that we did Maimorim from a different year. And now we're going back to our regular Limud of Tafshin Lamed Vav, which is where we're holding in our learning of the Maimorim of the Rebbe, Ala Seder, where we try to learn each year 1 year of Maimorim of the Rebbe. I just want to mention that tomorrow, Shabbos, Yud Aleph Adarishin, is the yahrzeit of my grandmother, whose name was Sarah Rivka Rachel Bas Menachem Mendel. She was an American-born Jewess, raised by parents who were immigrants. Her mother, my great-grandmother, probably came to this country as a little girl. Her father came to this country as a teenager. His name was Menachem Sofer, and he lived in the Rockaways. He was a big Yirei Shamayim. He did a lot of Matan B'Seiser. Rabbi Yitzchak Masmid was in America, I think twice. And on each occasion he visited the Rockaways to raise money for the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he stayed in my Zayda's house, my great-grandfather's house, and he actually had her room. She had a little tiny bedroom with a bed. She told me he never slept in the bed, but he had the room. So she didn't sleep and he didn't sleep. He never slept in the bed, he slept in the chair. And when my father married my mother, my father was a Lubavitcher Chassid. My mother she came from her grandparents were Tzans in one way or another, Stropkiv. Wie kommt Chabad to Tzans? So there were 2 big explanations for how my mother married my father. The first was this, that the Biur Masmid stayed in my great-grandfather's home when he visited the United States for several weeks. And the second, and the more important one, was my grandparents, my grandfather, Shal Yecheskel B'Reb Menachem Mendel. And my grandmother, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow, Sarah Rivka Rachel Bas Menachem Mendel, had a beracha for the Frierdiker Rebbe for a shidduch. And then he met my grandmother. He was quite young, and in those days people did not get married young. But the shidduch had sich gemacht, and the Rebbe gave him a beracha for a shidduch, and he took the first peiri, the first fruit. My mother's the oldest; she's the bechera, hat genommen for sich. That's how tzaddikim operate. So tomorrow's her yahrzeit. She was an American-born Jew, went her whole life to public school, was a Yiras Shamayim, and a Isa Chesed. In certain ways, she was literally a Isha G'dayla, Mamish. In certain ways, she was an extraordinary and a very, very great lady. She never got old. She was always young and always growing. Knew everything and everybody and paid attention to every detail. And all of us are affected by her life and her passing. So we're going to learn a Maimer Chassidus and her schus and Lila Nishmasa. Now, this is a Maimer from Pashas Vayakheil, Tafshin Lamed Vav, that we're only holding Tetzaveh, so we're 2 weeks ahead, right? So we'll see how it plays out, because like I said, there's Maimorim that the Rebbe said during the week, there's a Purim Maimer. The Rebbe said a lot of Maimorim and Lamed in other bays. In other Alf, there's only 1 Maimer, the Shabbos Mevarchem Maimer, but in other Sheni there's, I think, 5. So we'll figure out how this is going to play out over the course of the various different Arvei Shabbos, Fridays. But this is the Maimer from Vayakheil, which is the Maimer of Shkalim. And we're holding Tetzaveh. So the real Parsha is Tetzaveh. The Maimer begins with a pasuk in Pashas Kisisa, and it was said in Pashas Vayakheil. The Teichen of the Maimer is about the Beis HaMikdash. We're building the Mishkan. And building the Mishkan is discussed over many Pashas. Truma, Kisisa, Truma, Tetzaveh, a good portion of Tisa, the beginning of Tisa, and then of course V'Yakov Pekudei is a repetition of the whole Parsha again. These few Pashas in the Chumash speak about the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe once spoke a Sicha on Pesach that we say in the Alachas kama v'kam, after the Dayenu and the Agadu, Bono alone was Beis HaBechira Lechaper Al Kol Aveineseinu, that until you have a Beis HaMikdash, where you Mechaper Al Kol Aveineseinu, Yitzias Mitzrayim is not complete. So when you talk about the Exodus, the Yidden going out of Mitzrayim, so the first thing you have to know is Ein noch ben chayrin elamisha esik v'talmud Torah. You're not free because you don't have a master. You're free because you're a slave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in our being in service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is where our freedom lies. That's number one. And number two, Ubana alone was Beis HaBechira Lechaper Al Kol Aveineseinu. You're not a complete servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu until there's a Beis HaMikdash, Lahakar Beikarbones, Ki Mitzvahs Tzitzenecha V'chuli. So the end of Yitzias Mitzrayim, that's the Rebbe says it in the Sichas, the end of Yitzias Mitzrayim is getting the Torah that allows you to serve Hashem and building the Beis HaMikdash that allows you to serve Hashem completely. Now, this Maimed, which is about Machatzis HaSheekl, and by the way, the Rebbe speaks both, Machatzis HaSheekl and Vayakheil, both, has a specific positive, specific approach. Uba Hagdam, I've mentioned this many times, and this plays out rather in a complicated and hard to understand or hard to ascertain way in the Maimorim Abasi Lagani. The Rebbe has a famous sikh in the Sichas Chelik Vav Pashas Truma, where the Rebbe discusses three opinions about the instructions and the building of the Beis HaMikdash. The first is that Hashem told Moshe, and Moshe told it to the Yidden, that they should build the Beis HaMikdash before the Aveda of the Egel was done, which the Rebbe says this is a Beis HaMikdash of Tzaddikim. The second opinion is that Hashem didn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu to build a Beis HaMikdash, and Yidden certainly did not collect the materials with which to build it till after the Chet HaEgel. And according to the second opinion, the Beis HaMikdash is the Nien of Tshuva. And the third opinion is they were told to build it before the Chet, and they actually collected the money and built it after the Chet. And this third opinion holds that the Beis HaMikdash incorporates all Yidden, Tzaddikim and Baal Tshuva. It's higher than our Avodah. So when you look at the Beis HaMikdash and you say, why did Hashem give us the mitzvah of building him a house? Right? Which literally means a specific house, not the way the Sfarim bring it, why was that instruction given? So there's different opinions. One opinion is we were given this mitzvah to build him a house as tzaddikim. Another opinion is we were given the instruction to build him a house because we were Balei Tshuva. And the third opinion is we were given the instruction to build a Beis HaMikdash because we're Jewish people. And when you learn the Maimorim about the Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Toichem, some Maimorim go in this opinion and some Maimorim go in this opinion. Some Maimorim speak about the Beis HaMikdash being built not because of Chet. And other Maimorim go in the opinion that the whole building of the Beis HaMikdash was a reaction to the Aveda, because Yidden did the Aveda of Rachmon al-San making and worshipping the Egel Azov, the golden calf, so as a tshuva, as a kapara, that they build the Beis HaMikdash. And a lot of the Maimorim Basi Legani go in that oifen, right? And the way you would explain it is that when Hashem wanted to have a house, the house would have been literally so my house would have been a Beis HaMikdash, your house would have been a Beis HaMikdash, his house would have been a Beis HaMikdash, her house would have been a Beis HaMikdash. But we did the Aveda. And even though we don't say the same Chazal Zu HaMosam like we say by the whole world, nevertheless we were compromised. So Hashem could not live in our home, so Hashem needs to have a house for himself, right? His own home. So the reason Hashem needs a specific home which is his. And of course, that Yerushalayim was not given for Yishuv. And the Eibishter lives separated. Like in the Midbar, there was a virtual tchum between his dwelling and where Meisha Aaron Obanov lived in Mizrach. Hashem is isolated. It's a reaction to Chet HaEgel. Yidden did Naveira. They were not perfect. They were not in the position the Eibishter should live in their homes. So Hashem says, also, Li Mikdash, make for me my own home, I'm going to live in. So some of my Maimorim go in this approach that the whole Beis HaMikdash is a yin of tshuva and kapara and a reversal of Chet HaEgel. Of course, other Maimorim say different, that the Beis HaMikdash is even for tzaddikim, but that's one model. This Maimed goes in that model. This Maimed, both the Kisisa part and the Vayakheil part, are going to speak to the idea that there was an Egel, an Aveda. And the Aveda made us imperfect. And the Aveda made the world, Chazar Zu Amasa, made the world not Cheres Mi Malach HaMoves. It made the world the way the world is not supposed to be. And the reaction of the Eibishter to this was v'asul lemikdash v'shachanti b'seicha, make for me a Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash will not only compensate for the fact that Hashem cannot live in the homes of every person, but it's going to be an atonement. L'chaper al nafshei seichem. It's going to raise us up. It's going to correct and reverse the Chet HaEgel. That's the spirit of this Maimer. That the building of the Beis HaMikdash was a reaction to the Chet HaEgel. Now let me talk us through the different steps. Step one. This doesn't say in the Maimer. This is just me talking. Step one. Hashem says to build a Beis HaMikdash because of Chet HaEgel, because he cannot live in the home of every single Jew because their homes are not clean enough. Step two. Hashem tells the Beis HaMikdash because he did the Chet HaEgel as a kapara, as an atonement for the Chet HaEgel, to correct it. And step three, Hashem told us to build the Beis HaMikdash as an atonement for the Chet HaEgel, to raise us to a place where we have no shaychus to Egel whatsoever. Now, when you learned Machatzis HaSheekl, which is what our Maimer is officially about, Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael Machatzis HaSheekl Shekel HaKiddush Esem Geira HaSheekl Machatzis HaSheekl Tumah LaHavaya. So the pasuk says L'chaper al nafshei seichem, that the Chet HaEgel was the Machatzis HaSheekl was an atonement for Chet HaEgel, and the Machatzis are trying to understand how could giving 50 cents out of $1 be a kapara for Chet HaEgel. There's many different explanations and many different terutzim and many different insights. Kidu u'mefursim. But this Maimer is different. This Maimer is different. And to be sure, I'm not certain if this Maimer has a makar b'chlal. I mean, the questions are classic questions, but the direction of this Maimer is very unusual. If I had to put it into words, this Maimer is going to talk about how the Beis HaMikdash, as represented by Machatzis HaSheekl and also by Vayakheil, is a correction for Chet HaEgel. But it's a correction for the Chet HaEgel on a level that we would typically call Tshuvei Law. You know that there's a difference between Tshuvei Tatah and Tshuvei Law. And the difference between Tshuvei Tatah and Tshuvei Law is not only the intensity of the Tshuvah, because Tshuvei Tatah can have Tshuvah Meyida and Tshuvah Me'avarabba. It's also Tshuvei Tatah. It's the direction. Tshuvei Tatah means I did an Aveda and I have to fix it. L'chaper al nafshei seichem. Kefer nafshi. Tshuvei Law is you connect yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When a person is connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they don't sin. You know, the way you say it in Kabbalah words is every tshuva has two parts, the Yud-K part of the tshuva and the Vav-K part of the tshuva. The Vav-K part of the tshuva is about what I did, and the Yud-K part of the tshuva is that the reason I was able to do something wrong is that my connection to Hashem was compromised. And if I strengthen my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'll never do that Aveda. This Maimer seems to be saying that the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan, and the Machatzis HaSheekl, and the Vayakheil is a tshuva on a madrege where you have no shaychus to chet whatsoever. That's the nature of the tshuva. Hashem raises us to a place where we're not just correcting the wrong, we're not just atoning for the sin, we're being raised to a place where we have no shaychus to an aveda whatsoever. However, that's not enough. This Maimer is going to, as they say in Yiddish, tanza beide chasenes. On the one hand, this Maimer is going to speak about how the building of the Mishkan of the Beis HaMikdash, as represented by the Psukim Kitisas Reish and Vayakheil Moshe, is be connected to the correction of the Chet HaEgel on a level we have no shaychus to Aveda whatsoever, and at the same time they're going to speak about his Machatzis HaSheekl and Nehera. Meaning, why did the Aveda happen? If Yidden don't make an Egel, we have a Beis HaMikdash of Tzadikim. Like the other Shita that says that the instructions for the Beis HaMikdash and the actual collection of the material to build the Beis HaMikdash both happened in the first 40 days, and which holds that the Beis HaMikdash was the binyan of Tzadikim. But this Maimer is going to go in the opinion that the Beis HaMikdash is a Beis HaMikdash of Balei Tshuva, and the Ma'ila of Bal Tshuva is transformed Klipa into Kedusha, but that the transforming or the transformance of Klipa into Kedusha is so wholesome that you have no shaychus to Klipa whatsoever. You're raised up to a place where there's no place for the Aveda at all. So it's a typical Shkalim Maimer, same questions, but a very, very different approach, I think. A very, very different approach, a very original approach. And one of the most important focuses of this Maimer is going to be the need for Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu has to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu has to do the Kitisa, and Moshe Rabbeinu has to do the Vayakheil, because since this Maimer is going to not only describe how the Beis HaMikdash is a kapara for the Chet HaEgel, but it's going to describe that it's like a kapara for the chet egel and a madrega where you have no shaykhs whatsoever to chet. This koyach is going to come from Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's an unusual version of the classic. I mean, how many Mamarim of Shkalim are there? Kiti says this. How many Mamarim of the Rebbe are there on Shkalim? Remember, every Maimer on Shkalim, the Rebbe could sometimes have two Maimarim on Shkalim, because one would be for the Pashas HaShavua, one would be for the David Pashas, and I think this year, Lamed Vav, the Rebbe said a Maimer during the week, Rosh Chodesh Oder Sheni, which is a Yidden. It's also a Maimer about Shkalim. So there are many Maimarim of Rabbi Seidin Nesiyenu, and specifically of Rabbeinu Nesiyenu, on Shkalim. They're all similar on the one hand, but they're all distinct on the other. This Maimer is rather original. Now, I cannot tell you, I remember every single Maimer that I ever learned from the Rebbe on Shkalim. I've learned quite a few. But this is unique, right? That the Shkalim is kapara. But kapara on the madrega of Tshuvei law, we have no shachas aveda whatsoever. And it's the culmination, making the world perfect in the realm of Bal Tshuva, in the realm of Ishapche, as opposed to in the realm of Tzadikim. And that the koyach for this comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rabbi said, I'm going to be learning the Maimer with you. And I'm going to be doing something helpful to me, maybe helpful to you, but perhaps Shalei Kvi HaKavana V'Aratz. I'm going to learn the Maimer without any questions. We're just going to learn the topic, the inyan. And after we finish learning most of the Maimer, literally most of the Maimer, and exploring it with the higoyin of the Maimer, the nekud of the Maimer, I'm going to go back to the beginning. I counted 11 questions, 11 diyukim. I'm going to go through each one and show you the answer. And I think one of them remains unanswered, and it's ironically the typical one, which is why you have to give a half a shekel, and why it's described as shekel HaKedesh is esrim, and you're giving only esed. This question, which is the question that normally is answered in the Maimarim, is in this Maimer asked and not answered. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to start. If you're using my text, if you're using the Seif Ma'am, see, the problem is I have the old Seif Ma'am Tov Shalom Vav. And in a year or two, Teres Menachem is going to give out a new one, and people are going to complain that I have a different text because they're going to rewrite the Maimarim. So if you look by me on my website, I have the PDF. You can download the PDF and you can learn the Maimer with me the way I have it from the Seif in Maram Tov Shalom Vav, which I bought 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. So the Maimer begins at page 121. We're going to start on page 120. We'll start on page 121. We read just a little bit 121. We're going to go to page 122. And like I said, we're going to learn more or less straight through the Maimer, but without questions and answers, just the higoyin of the Maimer. That the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the Kitisa and the Vayakheil's reaction to the Aveda. And it's the Chaper of Shesechem to raise us above the Aveda. But to raise us above to the Aveda to the extent that we have no shaychas to Aveda whatsoever, the Madrega, he doesn't use the words Tshuvei law, but he speaks the inyan of Tshuvei law. And that this is the ultimate is Machatzis HaSheekl and Ehera. And this has to be done with the care that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. So let's go. Kiti says Reish Ben Yisrael Moshe Rabbeinu was told HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to count the Jewish people, Livkudeim, to their number. But the Lashon HaPasuk is Kiti, so when you're going to raise up Reish Ben Yisrael, the heads of the Jewish people, Livkudeim, to the place where they're counted, V'nosnu, and they're going to give each person Keif and Nafshi Allah Hashem, the atonement of his Neshamat HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Gemer Zeh Yitnu, what should they give? Kol Lever Al Pkudim, everybody who's included in this count should give Machatzis HaSheekl, V'Gemer should give a half a shekel. And V'Afal Pi Shal Yitzarech Lasis Rak Eser Geira, even though in fact everybody gave a half a shekel, which is 10 Geira, the pasuk insists on saying Omer HaKosav Esrim Geira Shekel, that the whole shekel is 20, of which you gave a half, which is 10, and it finishes Umesayim L'Chaper Nafshi Sechem, to atone you for your Avedas. So this is the pasuk that describes, as Rashi says in Pashas Truma, one of the three trumas. There was the trumas for the Nidvas HaMishkan, there was the truma for the Nidvas HaAdonim, and there was the truma for the Karbanas. And this is the truma for the Adonim. Everybody gave a half a shekel of silver. Altogether it added up to 100 kikar, from which they, because a kikar is 3,000 whole shkalim, 600,000 people is 300,000 whole shkalim. 300,000 whole shkalim is 100 kikar la'adin. So that each one of the Adonim weighed a whole kikar. And everybody gave him Machatzis HaSheekl. Now go to the next paragraph, bottom of the page. Yashakashis and for Badrushim, the Maimorim further say that Kisisa Badrushim, the Kisisa. Badrushim Vayakheil, Bishneim, Adig, Bishava, in both places, the question is the same. Because in Pashas, the question is that it was done by Moshe Rabbeinu. And in Pashas Vayakheil, it also says that the gathering of the Jewish people needed to be done by Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says Vayakheil Moshe collected. And the Rebbe asks the question, the Jewish people collected themselves. Why do we focus on Moshe Rabbeinu? So we're going to now learn the Havana, what the Kushe Lepla called the Biur of the Maimer, the Higoyin of the Maimer. And when we're done, we'll go back and we'll turn over the question, we'll answer the questions. So we go to the page 122, the first full paragraph, second paragraph. The answer to all of these questions that we have not yet learned would be the following. All of these things, the building of the Beis HaMikdash and the collecting Machatzis HaSheekl to make that donim, gathering the Jewish people to teach them about the building of the Beis HaMikdash, the bringing of kabbanos in the Beis HaMikdash, and also the idea that you always connect the building of the Beis HaMikdash to Shabbos, as a result of Chet HaEgel. As the pasuk says, Kol Eiver Al Pakudim. Anybody who's been Eiver Al Pakudim, v'Isa, and it's broad, the Koyach Chet HaEgel, anybody who transgressed, Kol Ha'Eiver Al Pakudim, right? Kol Eiver Al Pakudim is, when he was children, we translate, everybody went through the count, like, Kol you would count animals by putting them under a whip. They would pass through, and you would hit the 10th one with a sikra, and that's how you knew it was meiser. So kol eiver apkudim means all the Jewish people go through the count. But the Yerushalmi says, it says in footnote 19, kol eiver apkudim means anybody who did the aveda. Kol eiver apkudim has to be counted. And what's the aveda? Chet HaEgel. And the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kisisa, and the Vayakheil, and everything else is a kapara for Chet HaEgel. Because the effect of the sin of the golden calf was nothing. Peter creates the opposite of unity, the opposite of one God. Because that's the idea of Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah doesn't say there's no God. Avodah Zarah is not atheism. Avodah Zarah doesn't say Kichashu Hashem v'lei malehu. Avodah Zarah says Avodah Zarah says there's a separation of powers. Hashem exists, and He's one, and He created heaven and earth, He created everything that's in it. But then He went away, and He left it over in the hands of the stars and the constellations, and they who govern the world with their own free will, separately from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore there's a point of being covered to them, and to build for them temples, and to bring for them karbonis, all the yanim of Avodah Zarah. But the yesod is that it's not just one God who's mastering and controlling everything. There's a division of powers. When the Yidden made the Chet HaEgel, when they made the golden calf, and they worshipped it, and they said, they established, they asserted, they stated through their actions that Hashem is not in charge of everything. The act of making the golden calf and worshipping it, as it turned out actually, not the way the Aaron was thinking about it, and the way the Tzaddikim were thinking about it, but the way the Eidiv Rav thought about it, was they were creating a division, that there's parts of the Eibishter's world that the Eibishter is not controlling. The opposite of Hashem Echad, an opposite of Anech Hashem Elokecha v'Yeh L'Chalakim Acherim, says the Rebbe, that's Avodah Zarah Pirud. Peter doesn't say there's no God. Peter says there's a separation between heaven and earth, between higher and lower, sublime and material, and that He's not a balabayas but tachtenim. So how do you fix it? By reunification. And the reunification ultimately is Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael and Vayakheil Moshe. As a correction, the whole business of the Beis HaMikdash from the beginning to the end is about creating unity where division existed. And one of the examples of this is Vayakheil Moshe, that Moshe gathers all the Jewish people and unifies the Jewish people, which is a symbolic statement of the idea of unity in the world. Masha Moshe Kin is Vichad as B'nei Yisrael. Moshe collects and unifies the Jewish people, from their condition of disparateness. They're put from a world of disparateness. One of the things about Mashiach is kibbutz goliath. He doesn't just gather us together. He makes us one. Where before we were disparate. But here you have another thing. It's not only that Moshe Rabbeinu has to give Achdus. But he has to give Achdus after Pirut from Avodah Zarah. Tzarech liyas Birur. In addition to giving Achdus, you have to make a correction of the Pirut from the Chet. Ushleimas Habirur bazeh, and the Birur has to be on the highest possible level. And if Yidden don't make an egel, and they build a Beis HaMikdash, so it's a building of tzaddikim. That building also would have been instructed by Moshe Rabbeinu, and its inyan also would have been, in one way or another, a inyan ha'achdus. But it would not have been achdus after Pirut. It would have been only achdus. Because there was a chet, and there's a need to be a tikkun a chet, so you have another avodah. Now you could say there's another avodah which comes from a chasaron, and you would be right, but the fact of the matter is there's another avodah. You're not only using the Beis HaMikdash to bring achdus into the world, which is the opposite of avodah zarah, and even the opposite of the possibility for avodah zarah, you're bringing achdus into the world to reverse avodah zarah, to be mavader avodah zarah. And that's the two ideas that require dafka Moshe Rabbeinu. They're building the Beis HaMikdash, which is offsetting avodah zarah in theory, and in reality also, because the fact is the Beis HaMikdash came after an aveda, it's offsetting the aveda, and therefore this Beis HaMikdash has the mile of his hapcha as well, or birurim, and both of these things require dafke Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rebbe goes into what we know classically as the V'yata Tetzaveh, and it's mamish very clear here. The Moshe is called the trusted shepherd, and this base pirushim as being a trusted shepherd has two translations. First of all, that he's reliable, like it says in Rabbi Munasech. You could trust him; he'll take care of his flock. You give him a job, he'll do it, and he'll do it well. But then the second is not only he looks after us, but he feeds us. And what is he feeding us? He's feeding us mehemna. V'raya mehemna hainu shezon ubefanes es amuna, or the lashon the ma'im v'ata tetzaveh zon yisol zon ubefanes es yisol ben amuna. And again, if you know the v'ata tetzaveh, you know that in Pei Gimel, the Rebbe quotes a Zoyar that says this idea word for it: ha'u hamuna delayelu yitzin v'yispanis mini al yodach. That Moshe Rabbeinu takes the amuna which Yidden have b'matana from Avraham Avinu, and he feeds it to the Jewish people in a way of mezenis and parnasa to be b'pnimius. And he explains, and he calls Yisrael Amin, and Jewish people are believers not because of Moshe Rabbeinu, because of Avraham Avinu. It's in our blood, it's in our DNA. The question is, how is it possible that we should have the famous syndrome, which is called ganva pulmach karya? You're about to steal. You're digging a tunnel to break and enter to somebody else's house to steal his wealth. And in the letter that Alter Rebbe to Avram Kalaskir, he brings also the idea of Eilei Domim, right? You find him in your house, because he's ready also to be a Reitzeach. And he davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asks Hashem to help him steal, and if need be, Rachman Son to kill. Larig aleharik. Va'ad, the end of it is that not only this person can daven and steal, and even Chas V'Shalom bring to murder, he comes to Avodah Zarah, Chat Avodah Zarah, which means Eibush is not a balabas at all. Ugadis, the big Gemara says, Kach, I'm not the Chase Yad, the Yitzhak trick is as follows. Yeh, Mema say Kach, today he says, do Gneva. Tomorrow tells you if you need also do the Tzicha. Avodah Zarah, which means you don't care anymore. This Eibush is not a balabas. Rachmana litzlan. And the Rebbe says the Chein Haya Eitzel Chet HaEgel the Yatzel Lepoya Lechet HaVidar. It actually happened that Yidden fell so low as to say, "Other the Shem es Haaretz b'dei ki Chavim u'Mazal." Hashem's not in charge. And there's two Reshuyos, and they announced it, and they established it, and they worshipped it, and they believed it. So the Shaila is L'Chaira Eich Shayach Zeh Kanal. If Yisrael, if Yidden have Emunah, not from Moshe Rabbeinu, but from Avraham Avinu, like the Pasuk says, Churi Mireisha Amana, the first Maimon is Avraham Avinu, and he gave us a Chura, a Matana of Emunah. How did Yidden fall to do Gneva and Yitzich and Avodah Zarah? And the Talmud of it is, the Teretz is, because Emunah, it's true that every Jew has faith, but the Emunah is B'Bechinas Makiv. The Emunah is in a way that's indirect. Like I always tell my students, the greatest thing about Emunah and the worst thing about Emunah are both the same, that you're born with it. Because whatever you're born with is easy, that's advantageous, and you take it for granted, that's disadvantageous. So I believe in Hashem, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to live that way. I believe in righteousness and goodness, but it doesn't necessarily I'm going to be righteous and good. I have to make it my own. It says, the Emunah which we already have needs to be shepherded. Lozunus Hamuna, to feed the faith, and to feed the faith to us in a way of Mezenes. Shetove, V'toyer b'pnimis, it should enter into us and shine into us in a pnimis, in a personalized way. And Aidezeh Shareya Umamshech Hasamun b'pnimis and Moshe Rabbeinu. And he is the one who shepherds and draws our faith to be personalized into us, that we shouldn't just believe in Hashem, we should believe in Hashem in such a way that when the famous mice with the Baditchever, that when he came back from his rich and his shver was complaining to him, what did he learn? He said, now I know there is a God. So the shver brought a goy, a shiksa, into the house and asked her if she believed in God, and she said yes. So he said to the Baditchever, she's a simple woman, she knows there's a God. What is she says, she says she knows, I know. And knowing means that our life actionably and practically every minute of the day and the night reflects it. So the Rebbe says, it forewarned that there shouldn't be a possibility of Vayakheil. No way. You can never believe and establish separation of the Eibishter's world because your emunah is personalized. V'gam, moreover, not only will Moshe Rabbeinu's personalizing our faith prevent us from being Eved Avodah Zarah, he will also protect us that we can't even do a lesser Aveda, like stealing, and daven to Hashem that he should help us. So the first level is that Moshe's personalization of faith takes away the possibility of Avodah Zarah. And the second is it takes away the possibility of thievery, of theft. We're davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Biz, number 3, as does Bavor and Gamkin, it also forewarns, a person cannot stumble even in the smallest and slightest Aveda midrabanan. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu gives us Amunah, it's in such a way that everything is important. Moreover, number 4, that ye etzle kalas shabakals k'mei chamur shabachamurus, the smallest of the small, the biggest of the biggest are equal. Like it says in Tanya Perikov, hey. And the Rebbe is going to mention on the next page when he talks about the question of Echta v'Yashuv, that it's medida b'melech macham nacham HaKadosh Baruch Hu, anytime a person does an Aveda. So there's a difference between one Aveda and another in terms of the substance of the Aveda. But there's no difference in he who against who we're rebelling when we're doing that infraction. The Eibishter is one. So even though he considers some Avedas big and some Avedas small, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it's Gzeres HaKosov. But in the aspect of Merida, they're all equal. So not only will I be Nizid and Kal Shabbakas and Chamuras Shabbachamuras, but that they're going to be equal. And number 5, V'yenizid Afilu, the person is absolutely precise, B'minei Yisrael. Even customs that were added later, he's going to be particular about, and he's not shaychus to be violate them because his emunah has been so personalized. Because it says, the Gemara says, Kol Masha Talmud Vasek Asad Lechadish includes Menhagim because it's not Ratzon Hashem. So the Rebbe says 5 steps in the powerful effect, not of having emunah personalized. You won't do Avodah Zarah, you won't steal, you'll be nizir in small Avedas as well. To you, the smallest and the biggest is equal, and any minhagim which you added later on take on the same earnestness, the same importance as the halachas themselves. And all of this, only Moshe Rabbeinu can do this. Nobody else but Moshe can give this to us. Shehu haraim, and the dafka Rebbe, dafka Nasi b'Yisrael, dafka Moshe Rabbeinu shepherds faith. Shereyes Amunah, he shepherds our faith. And of course, this is true not just of Moshe Rabbeinu Wagashmi. It's true of this Pashtusa de Moshe Shebechol Dara V'Dara, or the Lashon Hamedish which the Rebbe brings, Ein Der She'ein Bei K'Moshe. Because the job of a Rebbe is to give us God. You know, I tell this to my students, Rosh Hashivas give us Lomdus, Rabbanim give us Halacha, a Rebbe at Tzaddik gives us God. The Masmid wrote at the Rogatchover the Sarah Teire and the Frierdiker Rebbe Sarah Alekim. What does the Rebbe give us? He gives us Eibishter. He puts it on a platter. The Eibishter is inside of us. He gives us the Eibishter inside of us that is such a real way that our practical lives reflect that he's real. That's the role of a Rebbe. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu is the Re'ei Emunah. He strengthens their Emunah, and the proof that he strengthens their Emunah is that it translates into our behavior actionable. And the Rebbe is now going to explain it in Kabbalah, in holy words. Hine. Moshe is Das Elyon. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Madrega of Das Elyon. In other words, Das Shalamayla Mechochma Bina. Das connects. So Das Tach connects the mind and the heart. That what my brain understands, my heart should feel, and my body should act. Das Elyon doesn't connect my mind and my heart. It connects my soul and my mind. Some place it says Das Elyon is Mechaber Chochma Bina. And some place it says Das Elyon is Mechaber Kesed and Chochma. But in both cases, Das Elyon is about connection, but not connection of an idea that I understand, that I should live it, but something that I know in my soul that I should live it. And then it's going to trickle down from the neshama into my moyach, into my lev, into my actions. This is Moshe Rabbeinu's job. His madregi is das elyon, and he gives us das, not just to connect the things that we understand. The famous story with the Isaac Homler and the Zalman Zezmer and the Pesach Malastovker, the hard soul feeling with the Koba greift. Not just to connect the mind and the heart, that's called das tachten, but to connect the soul and the mind, which is called das elyon. V'lachein peil b'chochma b'ina Moshe Rabbeinu affects our brain. A Yid understands God. Moshe doesn't change his understanding. Moshe changes the meaning, the value, the power of that understanding by connecting it to the neshama. And he explains it. It says in Zayir Yisratzen and Yisratzen, there's two levels of Ratzon Ratzon Shalom Bat Shalpi Seichel Shalom Ma'ila Ben HaSeichel. And in Chassidus, you know, the Iker in Ratzon is Ratzon Shalom Ma'ila Ben HaSeichel. Will that doesn't come from what I understand. I want something because I understand it. But will that comes because I know it in my soul. It's inherent in me. It's one with me. And my will comes from my deeper sense of truth. And madregas Moshe is rotz and shalamai. Let me tell me medida vagbala lamai. Let me tell me das Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega is. He's tuned into the will of God, the will of being a Jew, the will of serving Hashem, which is not based on the brain. And he gives it to us in the form of the internalization of our faith. And then he says, achach pel b'seichel. There's Dimshach b'das, which is mechaber, and he speaks from Tanya Peri Gimel. The das is over there, he's talking das tachten, to connect moyach and lev. Yitke machshavte b'chezek, and then he'll give birth to the midas, ava v'anafer. V'yire v'anafer, that ava v'yire sher zechol mitzvot Tanya Peri Daled. Love is the source of the Ramach Mitzvasei, the chayes, right? The chayes of all the mitzvasei is avas Hashem, and the chayes of all mitzvahs is yiras Hashem. So there's a trickle down. Moshe gives us Emunah in a way of Mazen and Panosa. He internalizes our faith, but from a level of Das Elyon, Emunah which is above the mind, and it changes how the mind understands. Not that it changes the mind by corrupting its objectivity, but by giving integrity to its objectivity. That what the brain understands is real. And then it comes down into the heart to love God and to fear God, which translates into actions. And the Rebbe adds further, Keil kol mitzvahs derabanan, because included in the deiraisis is all the rabbanans. Everything is ultimately connected to the deiraisis. Ukudisa b'chenachot says in the beginning of the second section of Tanya that all the rabbanans are connected to the deiraisis. And all this is Moshe Rabbeinu, and it translates into action. So Moshe's inyan is das elyon, which is why he gives us the internalization of our faith. But it doesn't stay in Das Elyon. It comes down from Das Elyon into life. It comes down from Das Elyon into what we understand, what we feel, and what we do, that we have no shaykhs ta'aveda whatsoever, to the extent that to us, being nizir in a minig, which was started by our Rebbe last week, is shokol to Anechi Hashem Elokecha mamish, because when you have emunah internalized by the madrega of Das Elyon, even though this is earlier, and this is later, and this is bigger, and this is smaller, this is the Reisa, this is the Rabbanon, this is a Din, and this is a Minik, but in terms of he who we're worshipping, which is the Eibishter, they're all equal. And the Rebbe concludes, Moshe has to do this. That Moshe is Vayakheil, he collects, makes unity in each one of us, and in all of us together, Mamshech Das Elyon. And it comes down into our mind, and then it comes down into the Divlev, which is in our heart, and that's Shabolamais. So you only Moshe Rabbeinu is able to do this. Only Moshe Rabbeinu is able to take the faith which we have Birur from Avraham Avinu and strengthen it and personalize it to such an extent that we're not connected to Chesaron at all. But we're not connected to Chesaron because we're afraid of the Chesaron, which would be a Chuvah Tatah model. We're not connected to a Chesaron because we don't want to go to Gehenna. We're not connected to Chesaron because of a deep connection to Hashem, and that's Chuvah law, and that's the uniqueness of this Titisa Maimer. That the counting of the Jewish people, which is L'chapar al Nafshei Seichem, has to be done by Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's going to bring us to a state not where we're removed from the Aveda, but we're so connected to Hashem. We have no Shaykhs Aveda whatsoever. And he finishes, number one, Shalei Makam L'Aveda, is no possibility for an Aveda. And number two, Yeshleimus HaBirur. And these two ideas are the same two ideas that I mentioned before. If there hadn't been an Aveda, the Mishkan would also come from Moshe Rabbeinu, and it would give us Achdas. Because of the Aveda, in addition to giving us Achtos, it's also correcting the wrong, and that's Shleimus HaBirur. So this Maimed is saying the following. The Beis HaMikdash could be in different models. But we're learning that the Beis HaMikdash is a reaction to the Aveda. Hashem told us the Beis HaMikdash could be the Aveda, Chateigel. And it has to therefore reverse the Chateigel. Number one, by asserting Achtos, where the Egel introduced Pirud. And number two, by being Mavader the Pirud that the Egel represented. And both of these things require a Keach that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why it says, Ki Tisa, Lashon Yachid, Moshe counts. And Vayakheil Moshe collects. And the Rebbe now continues, V'dal Mashakosov, Vayakheil Moshe gathers us together, that Moshe Rabbeinu is above us. Shushvina de Malka. And he creates a unity in the Jewish people from the top down by giving us this Emunah and all the points that he made. However, which is before Moshe can collect us from the top down, we need to be collected from the bottom up, and that's Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael, which is Allah Mulmata Lamayla. So Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael also not by Moshe Rabbeinu, but that makes us Kelim for his gift of Eyamunah and Da'aselyan and Achtos and so on. And then there's the Vayakheil. Vaydei sheyesh netchila Allah, then achar kach yav hamshacha v'yakam Moshe. The Rebbe says why you have to have twice. Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu raises Yidden out of their connection to the Aveda by counting them. And Moshe has to do it because he has to raise us up to a place we're completely above any shachas to an Aveda. And then Vayakheil, he collects us and he brings us into his world, which makes us, I guess, safe from having any association with Ra and any Madreg. So the Nekuda is there's some things that Moshe must do. And in this Maimed, it's protect us not from the vulnerability from Aveda, but from Aveda that we actually did. But that the nature of the protection is that we have no shaykhs to it whatsoever, because we've been raised up in our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Madrega of Da'asel. And again, the way I'm interpreting it, using my own word, this is Al Derech Mashal, the Inyan of Tshuva Ilah. Turn to page 124. Now listen to this. Listen to this. Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael Lifkudeim. Right? Kol Eiver Al Apkudim. So the Rebbe said, Kol Eiver Apkudim means anybody who did Naveda, right? He brought it from a Yerushalmi. It's in footnote 19. Kol Eiver Apkudim doesn't mean anybody who goes under the count. But to whoever did Naveda. But then it also says, Kitisas Reish Yisrael B'nei Yisrael Lifkudeim. You know what that Lifkudeim? That we should have no shaykhs to Aveda whatsoever. Listen to this. V'hine. Aidei Shemesha Mamshach Da'aselyan. Mesha gives us Da'aselyan. Nasa Chisaron Ara Lefkudeyem. He doesn't translate our count, our lack, like Kipoket Mishavech. Our space is empty. What are we missing? We're missing Ra, like the Rebbe brings from the Gemara based on the pasuk. V'libi Chol B'kirbi that David HaMelech had no Yitzhar Raki Horge B'Taydus. He left an empty space. Lefkutisas Reish B'nei Yisrael Lefkudeyem. You raise Yidden up to a Madrege that they're V'libi Chol B'kirbi. They're missing Ra. There, Masha calls of the Pshat and the Pasuk says Reish B'nei Yisrael Lifkudei Moshe Rabbeinu raises Yidden up to a Madrega Lifkudeim that they're lacking any association to the possibility of an Aveda. So they're going from having made an Egel, not only to being atoned to having made that Egel, but being raised to a place where they have no shaykhs to the possibility of doing such a chet, and not even doing Geneva, and not even being mechalek between kalas and chamuris, and seeing them at shava, nigab, and minhagi, all the 5 points he made before. Means that the space should be empty. And by the way, in footnote 35, he's mitzayin to a Teira which says this word. And that we should teach us B'nei Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu raised up to Madrega that we're missing something. And what are we missing? The Masha Kosov Lifkudeim. When it says in the Pasuk Lifkudeim, if Milosh and Kiyipok, Meshavech, the space is missing, Shayin Chesad will be a lack. And what's the Chesad? Not that Mash Kosov Dei Mash Lash Chesad, just a Chesad and we're missing evil. Hainu, this means like this. Shayadei, Yam Shachas Da'asai B'Meish Rabbeinu giving us Emunah in such a deep level that we raise up the Da'aselim, which means to say that our Emunah is based on something which is not connecting the mind, the heart, but connecting the soul to the mind. Bavar us it 4 words. She'eini Nesin Mokum. There's no possibility for that whatsoever. The person is missing the reality and the possibility and the prospect and the potential for evil completely. Nothing of the evil remains at all. So the Rebbe is saying that the tikkun for Chet Egel is the Beis HaMikdash. But what does the Beis HaMikdash do with Tisas Reish B'nei Yisrael of Kudeim? It raises up to a madrege, not that we are reversing the sin, not that we're being atoned for the sin, but we're raised to a place where there's no sin at all, no possibility for it, which is the Inyan L'Cheder of Tshuva Yilah. V'Inyan, who the Rebbe explains, because we know that the Gemara says, "Ein Adam Eved Em Ken Nichnas Beirur Shtus." You can't do an Aveda without losing your mind. Shtus, Amadam Shchasei, right? Ruach Shtus makes you go out of your mind, but you can go out of your mind. You can't go out of your soul. Amnam. Adam Shach, as Bechinat Shameshu and Moshe Rabbeinu gets involved, and he gives us Das Elyon, a connection to Hashem which is higher than Seichel, which affects that our Amunah should come from a place which doesn't connect the mind and the heart. It connects the soul and the mind, and then it trickles down into the heart, into the actions. The evil is completely eliminated. Then the Rebbe adds, so if we hadn't done the Aveira, and Moshe Rabbeinu gives us the Eyamunah, we would also be in this Maimed Amat. But because we did the Aveira, and the Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael and the Vayakheil Moshe is not only giving us a koyach to be raised above Aveda Lagamre, but to reverse the Aveda that we did, and to be raised up above that Aveda to the extent that we have no shaykhs whatsoever, therefore also affects a Birur. Ta'arei, and he brings Chafei now. The whole word of Tanya, right? How could you use Ava Misateris not to do any Avedas? And the answer is because you don't make a chilik between Kal Shabakal and Chamur Shabachamuris. There are big Avedas and little Avedas. But that's only if you define the Aveda by what you're doing. But there's no such thing as big and little when you define it by against whom you're rebelling. And when you define it by against whom you're rebelling, the smallest thing and the biggest thing are not only both serious, but they're equal mamish. And Moshe Rabbeinu raises up to that space. When you know you're standing in front of the king, there's no possibility for evil at all. And Moshe Rabbeinu brings us into that Maimed Amat. Even though the Gemara says that the Gemara says if a person does an Aveda thinking that led they're not going to help him to tshuva, so the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Take ein maspikin. Says the Rebbe, on the normal conditions you can't do an Aveda and then we're thinking that you're going to do tshuva. Hashem is not going to help you do tshuva. You can do tshuva always. So then why can't the person do an Aveda and say he'll do tshuva later? Says the Rebbe calls it. Nevertheless, the person has been raised to a place of awareness that his reality is in front of the Melech Macham HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eyamun of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Das Alin of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ein Nafkamina makes no difference. That Afilu Tnua Kala, the slightest motion, which is not consistent with his service of the king, is Medida B'Malchut. It's a rebellion. Like the Gemara says, if you make the slightest motion with your hand in the presence of the king, Yechayev Misa, because it's also Medida B'Malchut. And that's the whole word of Tanya Perek Chesed Chafei, using the Ava Misuteres to stop yourself from doing a Chet of Aveda Zara. But you're also identifying every single Aveda Chet of Aveda Zara by focusing not on what you're doing, but against whom you're rebelling. And Moshe Rabbeinu corrects the Chet HaEgel in us on this level. V'lachein, Hamshocha Das Elyon, Moshe Rabbeinu brings to us Das Elyon. Not only it forewarns that we shouldn't do it again, and that it corrects the wrong that we did, and so on. The person is raised to a place where he has no shaykhs lachet at all, that he's inherently protected from diktu kal, from the slightest nuance of halacha and minhagim, because he's connected to the Melech. There's no point of evil. Which is like with the Regev, tshuva higher than tzaddik. You're one with the Lukus. And that's why the Rebbe uses both the word Achdus as well as the word Birur. So again, this is a classic maimed that the Machatzis HaSheekl was a correction for Chet HaEgel. But the Maimorim usually speak about the idea of Machzis, whatever Machzis means. Here the focus is not so much on the Machzis, even though in the questions the Rebbe speaks of Machatzis HaSheekl, but he doesn't mention it in the answers. The focus is on Moshe, on the Kitisa. That Moshe raises us to a place where we have no Shaychas Taveda whatsoever. And that's why the Pasha finishes. There's atonement for our nefesh. Translates the Rebbe Shleim was HaKapara. It's a level of kapara that can never be improved upon. There's no kapara beyond it. That Loshen, kapara, l'chapa is Loshen. Boy, l'chipar yadeha, you have to clean hands. Which is nitim mikol lichuch, that a person is purified from every aspect of Shmutz. The Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya. Niges Tshuva Perek, that's Lashon Kinuach, Shemakanech Lichloch Hachet. And here it's Nita Mikol Lichloch. You have no connection to Shmutz whatsoever. Here's Mitzayin Niges Tshuva Perek Beis. But it's also brought Niges Tshuva Perek Aleph. And the Rebbe says, that's a Shleimus Birur. You become completely corrected. So that if you didn't do the Aveda, you could reach that Madrege with the help of Moshe Rabbeinu. You did the Aveda itself is corrected. And it has the Yisrael of Tshuva. So, what we did was, we learned the Maimed, minus the questions. It was Gishmak, it was sweet, it was beautiful. That both Kitisa and Vayakheil have to be done by Moshe Rabbeinu. Because they're a reaction to Chet HaEgel. And they're a healing and a reversal of Chet HaEgel. And it's so high that we at that point have no connection to Chet at all. But there's another factor. Whenever you mention the Beis HaMikdash, you mention Shabbos. That you're not Mechalel Shabbos, Lebinyan Beis HaMikdash. Shabbos is higher than it. Now, according to this Maimed, although there's other places which say different, but according to this Maimed, that the building of the Beis HaMikdash is the reaction to an Aveda, and it's the correction of the Aveda, and it's the reversal of the Aveda, and it's the Birur of the Aveda, until you reach Shleimus HaAchdas, you have no Shachas to Aveda whatsoever. Daf Mavoren in Shabbos. That on Shabbos there's no building of the Beis HaMikdash. There's no tshuva, there's no Birur, there's no tikkun, there's no nothing. But the Rebbe is going to say that after all of the avodah comes Esht Shabbos, which is even higher. Let's read. V'hinei Hashleim b'shebelam kotten ze ha'adam. We know that a human being is a miniature world. They state in Avos de Rab Nosson, right? He brings a Tanchuma. Footnote 4 brings Tanchuma. But the Adam, the Elam Katan, the Adam is Kasher and Mishleimus of Elam Agadol. Says the Rebbe. So when we talk about the idea that Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael Vayakheil Moshe Rabbeinu raises Yidden up L'chap L'kol Eiver Alap Kudim, right? Kitisas Reish B'nei Yisrael L'kudem Kol Eiver Alap Kudim L'chap Al Nafshi Seichem. The end of it is Shabbos. Shleim, Mr. Beilam HaGodol, here the end of the greater world is the idea of Shabbos. Shagam Kamesh Eilam Amelu, never the world was created perfect. Nevertheless, Hayitzarach Li Shleim is blessed to be more perfect. Like it says in the Medesh Ma, Hayilam Chasam Menucha, the world which was Eilam Amelu Niver was missing something. And it was missing rest. Basa Shabbos, Basa Menucha. Shabbos came to bring rest to the world. The Shabbos, Shu'inyan Ashvisa V'achesem, it's the sealing and the rest. It's explained in many places. We learned in the previous Maimer, where the Rebbe says Shabbos is connected to Atzmos. Because everything in the world, if it's alive, is in a state of movement, of Tnuah. It's in the Basiligani Take, from Tafshach Beis. Shabbos represents Atzmos because Shabbos you rest. How could you be in a state of rest and not motion? Because you're Mamish Eibishter. Hashem doesn't move because his life comes from himself. Ein Seif moves, whatever it is, Dveikis, Istalkus Vespashtus, Rotze Veshev, Mati Vilemati. The motion is a sign of connecting to a source and manifesting as an entity unto itself. The idea of rest is that I don't have to go any place to live because my life is from in me. That's Atzmos, and that's Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, in Vayakheil, that the world that the Eibishter made perfect needs to be culminated further. That Shabbos is Shleim as the Chol HaBriya. And of course you all know the word that it says Eila Teldes Hashemayim V'Odas be upon him with two vavs. And it says Eila Teldes Peretz with two vavs. That there is a Shleimus of the creation, and then there's the Shleimus of Mashiach. And the Shleimus of Mashiach compared to the Shleimus of creation is connected to Peretz, breaking boundaries. So the world is already Shalom, and L'cheira, the world already has a Shabbos. And then there's a higher Shabbos which has to do with a higher Shleimus. But listen to this. B'chdei shetiyeh shleimus, to have the higher Shleimus, that is more Shalom than the Shleimus of the creation by itself, it's through his Machatzis HaSheekl in Heira, and it requires Chet HaEgel. Ouch! The Rebbe almost says the Chet HaEgel has to happen, right? The famous word of the Rebbe from the middle of the Rebbe, Neira, Alil, Al B'nei Yadam. The Chet HaEgel has to happen. Why? The world is perfect. But the world is perfect without his Machatzis HaSheekl in Heira, without Birur. When the world is perfect after a Chet, so it's also perfect, but it's perfect after a chet, and therefore you have the mile of his Hachatzis HaSheekl and a Heira, or what the Rebbe called before Birur. And al derech zeh you're goes, it's the same thing. Because Shagam, but tzaddikim, with your tzaddikim, there's Balei Tshuva. Tzaddikim serve Hashem b'derech yashar, Balei Tshuva serve Hashem through Tshuva, and the Rebbe says Golus affects that tzaddikim should also be Balei Tshuva, like it says in the Zeir, Mashiach also, Asavat Atakai B'Tiyufta. So there's Shabbos of the world as it's perfect, and there's the Shabbos of the world after Chet HaEgel, after Tshuva, and that's a higher Shabbos. So you always link Shabbos to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, because the building of the Beis HaMikdash is the reversal of Chet HaEgel, to the extent that you're in the highest madregas of Tshuva law, and then there's a Shabbos after that. There's the rest that comes. There's the being one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that comes after what the Rebbe called in the Maimer Birur, what the Rebbe called in the Maimer Hachatzis HaSheekl and Heira, which is even higher than that state of rest when the Elam is al milui nivra but without a chet. So, I guess you would say that there's two Shabbos. There's the Shabbos of the world if the world was in a state of tzaddik. There's the Shabbos of the world if the world is in a state of Balei Tshuva. So even though the Vayakheil Moshe and the Kitisa Moshe raises Yidden up to these highest levels, higher than all of that, there's the Shabbos that comes after it. Moshe Rabbeinu raises us up to a place where we have no shaychus echet whatsoever, and then there's a Shabbos. Birur Shleim is an Astei Moshe, only Moshe is able to do it. And that's why Moshe is connected to Shabbos, in addition to Moshe being connected to the Beis HaMikdash, Kitisa. And Vayakheil, Moshe is connected to Shabbos because it's Shleimus Shalom Eilam Eilam Canal. The Shabbos Bechlal is higher than Eilam Eloi Nivra, and the Shabbos of Mashiach Avel Tel Des Peretz is even higher than the Shabbos of creation. And where do you see that Moshe is connected to Shabbos? Number one, called Talmud Chacham Nikah Shabbos. Number two, the Gemara says Moshe Shaper Ka'amrit Moshe Rabbeinu's emes, and that makes Moshe Rabbeinu Reish Chalatz Talmidei Chacham. And since Talmidei Chacham are connected to Shabbos, Talmid Chacham Ikri Shabbos, so Moshe is for sure connected to Shabbos. This is a Zoyar also. So Moshe is connected to Shabbos because he's the highest of all the Talmidei Chacham, and Talmidei Chacham are called Shabbos. The other connection is, and this is a little bit funny, he passes away on Shabbos. Now, passing away is a bad thing. It's even tzaddik that the Yes and Yonish and Meishes Shapel Shlemis Kanal Shabbos, he passes away on Shabbos. Now, this is an interesting situation because we're trying to explain that Moshe's connection to Shabbos is a positive thing. That Moshe's Aved, he raises up to the Madrega of Das Elyon and Tshuva law and all of these good things, which is culminated by a Shabbos, and Moshe is connected to Shabbos. A, he's a Talmid Chacham. B, he passes away on Shabbos. So you have to say the word the same. Moshe's passing away has an aspect of Chesaron, but after that aspect of Chesaron, you come to a bigger Maila. That the Stalkus is a Hilula, Matalamilis. Like the Rebbe said once, that after Mashiach comes and Tchias HaMesim happens, the Tzaddikim are going to be Neshamas Beguf, are going to celebrate their Yom Hilula. And then the Rebbe says here that Moshe is connected to Shabbos because he passed away on Shabbos, and he mentions Tzidkas Chatzedek. The Tzidkas Chatzedek is a Tzaddik Adin. La'asid Love, we're going to say for Dvarim Merayim also a Teva HaMeitiv. The Tzidkas Chatzedek is going to become Tov. And this is a Shabbos, which is Hachatzis HaSheekl and Heira. It's a Shabbos of Birur rather than a Shabbos of Tzaddikim. So Moshe's connection to Shabbos also has the element of Eila Tildes Peretz rather than Tildes Shmayim V'Aretz. It's the correction of wrong. Birur. It's Hachatzis HaSheekl and Heira. That you take the Inyan Amisa and you reverse it. You're saying to Tzidkas Tzedek because he passed away, which is not a good thing. And L'Asid Lavi, it's a Teva HaMeitev on that as well. I mean, I'm putting a lot of words into the Maimed. And by the way, as I'm putting these words into the Maimed, I'm thinking that maybe that's what the Rebbe was thinking, even though he didn't say it, but the Inyan of Machatzis HaSheekl. The Rebbe spoke in Tavshim Ches, but the Rebbetzin passed away. That the Inyan of Machatzis HaSheekl, right, there's a Shekel HaKedesh. The Mizrach Maggid says, we're a half, and we need to complete it by another half. So sometimes we say it's the Nefesh Kisa, the Nefesh Bahamas. Sometimes they say it's the Keches Egilum, Keches Ne'alamim. Sometimes they say it's one Jew and another. And sometimes they say it's Neshama and Guf, that the Neshama left the Guf. And that's why there's Misa. And Machatzis HaSheekl is to rejoin the Neshama and the Guf together. And I guess you could say it in this Maimed, that's taking the Tzidkas Tzedek, which is connecting Moshe Rabbeinu to Shabbos in a negative way and making it into a positive. It's Hachatzis HaSheekl and Heira and Tachas Shemes HaBirur. Everything I just said in the last 3-4 minutes I invented. It doesn't say in the Maimed. But it would explain how Machatzis HaSheekl comes into this Maimed as well, even though the Rebbe is not going to spell it out. And again, my mocker is the Maimed Zeh Yitnu, which the Rebbe said during the Shabbos of Shiva in Tafshir Memches. That Fabringen, the Rebbe came to 770. And then Shabbos you didn't see anything on the Rebbe. As soon as Shabbos was over, you saw Avelis. But on Shabbos you saw nothing. The Fabringen started with a Maimed. The Maimed was an hour. I remember thinking B'Shas Maaseh that maybe now there's going to be more chassidus, but Lepeil the Rebbe wound it down. But the Maimed was at Machatzis HaSheekl, bringing together the two halves, making them into a whole. It's a long arichas, and one of the yonim was Chiyas HaMeis. And the Rebbe concludes, V'hinei, Ayidei she'etzli aveda shelamayla me'elam ameloi nivra, when a Yid serves Hashem, higher than how the world is perfect. And forgive me for adding again, higher how you have a Shabbos associated with the perfection of the world. Because he's serving Hashem Madrega Vela till this Peretz Malei. So then you have a Shabbos, which is after Peretz, after the Inyan of Tshuva, after the Inyan of Aveda, after the Inyan of Chet, after the Inyan of Ishapcha, after the Inyan of Birudim, Nas, Gamachakach. You have after Mashiach comes another Vayakheil Moshe. Moshe collects us again with the Shleimus HaBirur, making the Klip into Kedusha, making the Aveda into the Mitzvah, making the Hepech Achtas itself into the highest Madrega of Achtas. Shleimus Zu Sheitzel HaAdam. The way this plays out, that a person should achieve the Shleimus is Kshudim, Shleimus HaElam plays out in the world as well. Because Gamas HaElam doesn't believe it. Like it says in the Kutatei, the emphasis in Tanya Perek Lamed Zayin. Shaydei Shadam Ataken Etzas may believe when a person corrects himself. They're not Mitzayin to Perek Lamed Zayin, but Lacheda, that's what it says. Hine Aydei Zepel HaShleimus BeElam, the whole world becomes uplifted. It's not Sadir Aliyas Barach B'Tachtenim. Both the Shleimus, if we had been tzaddikim as well as the shleimus, by the virtue of the fact that, what did the Rebbe say before? Hoya chet egel. The chet egel had to happen. So you should have an aveda, which you need to do tshuva, and then you have a new shleimus abeda, a new hishapcha HaSheekl and heda. The hishapcha of tzaddik adin to hateva ametiv. Opei lemei veidezu eidus managos we affect even in times of golus. And that is a Mashiach, which brings Mashiach Shayiv the Beis HaMikdash came to Yikabes Nitcha Yisol, which is the same as Vayakheil Moshe ubesumcha v'tov levov. Okay, we're done. Yeah, I learned the Maimed, and I went quick at the end. I taught you the Maimed. In the last 5-6 minutes, I was ad-libbing. Because as you see now, I'm going to be going over the Maimed again. We're going to learn each question, and I'm going to show you where the answer is. But one of the questions the Rebbe doesn't answer, and that's the question about Machatzis HaSheekl. And I'm proposing that that's perhaps when the Rebbe mentions Tzaddik Adin, this is the reversal of Miseh, which is connected to Machatzis HaSheekl, like the Rebbe said 12 years after this Maimed, Zayitnu Tafshin Memches, but who knows? Okay, now let's breathe. Gewaldig, sehr schön. Right? It's a typical Maimed with a whole atypical interpretation. We're explaining Kitisa and we're explaining Vayakheil based on the fact that Moshe plays a central role and he raises up to a place we have no Shaychas to Chet whatsoever after Chet. So you don't only have Achtas, you also have Shleimus HaBirur. That's the Maimed. Most of the Maimonim of Machatzis HaSheekl speak about the two halves. You have to become a whole by joining two halves. The Rebbe sort of raises us higher than this. But let's go back, learn from the beginning, and ask each question and identify the answer. Okay? So it's page 121. Kiti says, Reish B'nei Yisrael Lufkudeim. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to count the Jewish people Lufkudeim to their numbers. V'nos Luish Kefen Nafshel Hashem. Each one has to give an atonement for his soul to the Eibishter. What is the atonement that anybody who goes through the count, or as the Rebbe is going to bring the Yerushalmi, who transgressed the sin, has to bring a Machatzis HaSheekl. And the pasuk says, even though you give only 10 gera, which is a Machatzis HaSheekl, the pasuk insists on saying Esrim gera shekel, that the complete shekel is 20. And the pasuk finishes, the parsha finishes, to atone for our avedas. Now here we go, number 11. Now what I did, I go from number 11 until number 18, and I have number 11 twice. Number 11 in the questions and number 11 in the answers. And that's how we're going to go. We're going to go back and forth. So if you don't have the text of this Maimed, this can get kind of tedious for you. But if you're holding the Maimed itself and you'll follow inside, you'll see what I'm doing. We learned the Maimed, now we'll learn the questions and the answers. Question 1. The Rabbeim's nuances and observations are well known. First of all, the question is Mashakosov Kitisa, the word Kitisa. Hakavon aliyim, and it means to count. Sheyimnu b'nei Yisrael, the Jewish people should be counted. So the first question is, why is it written, you should count? In singular, you should count collectively. Moshe didn't have to count himself. Moshe could have gotten help, right? In Pashas Bamidbar it says together with Aaron. Why over here this says kitisa? You have to count by yourself. Now, go to page 123 and read the first paragraph, the last 3 lines. Only Moshe could do this count. Now here it doesn't say kitisa, it's Vayakheil Moshe. But we know from the next paragraph that it's the same thing. Only Moshe could do this count because Moshe gives Yidden Das Elyon. And he brings them to a place that they're Bavoda and Shalayim Makam Laveda, V'yishleimus HaBirur, and as the Rebbe says in the next paragraph, at the bottom of 123, there's 2 levels to this. The second level is the Vayakheil Moshe, which is creating Achtos Malmayla Lamata. But the first level is, look at 4 lines from the bottom of the page, which is the Aveda Malmata Lamayla, Ketisa Sereish B'nei Yisrael. You know why it says Ketisa Lashon Yachid? Only Moshe could do it. Because he's not counting Yidden. He's raising Yidden up to the Madrega of Das Elyon, higher than their mind. Kitisa Sereish, you're raising up the Chochma Bina to higher than Chochma Bina. That's Das Elyon. Because if it would be Das Tachna, it would be Kitisa Slave. So only Moshe, who's in the Madrega of Das Elyon, can do this Kitisa, raise Yidden up to such a high place, which is a kapara for the Aveda. They're raised above the Aveda. They have no shaychus Aveda whatsoever. Only Moshe Rabbeinu can do it. That's the answer to why it says Lashon Yachid. Now go back to 121 again. Number 12, 8 Sadach Lav, and the next question is, Hine. There's a variety of different words that denote count, like the word Pekida, or the word Mispar, or the word Minyan. So why did it say Dafke Kisisa? Why is the word used to denote that the Jewish people are being counted, the word Kitis? Now, where's the answer? 124 at the top, right? That Moshe Rabbeinu is Mamshich Das El Yenasa Chisaron Ara. Kitisa doesn't mean to count, it means to raise us up. The Masha calls of it says Eish Ben Yisrael Lifkudeyem, that Moshe Rabbeinu raises up Yidden to a Madrega. Lifkudeyem doesn't mean to their Avedis, to the place where they're going to lack Lashon Chisaron, lack a connection to Aveda. So all the words that mean count, use the word kitisa because you want to understand that kitisa is lifkudeyim, that he's raising up Yidden to a madrega, that they're nedar, they're libi, cholol, bekirbi, ein leyetzer araki, horgi, betainas, that a Yid is nedar, chisorin, v'neshayches tara. And that's why it says the Lashon kitisa, because it's lifkudeyim. He's raising up to a madrega where they should be missing something. Question 3, which is number 13 on page 121 here. What's the point of raising up the heads? Specifically, when it says when the pasuk says you should raise up Yiddish people's heads, it's it goes against the principle of count. When you count things, you have big rocks and small rocks, yeah? Pretty rocks and ugly rocks. If you count them, they're all the same. You neutralize their differences. Smart people and simple people, righteous people and average people, they're different. When you give them a number, you make them the same. So the Rebbe's shaila is made aliyah a maila. When you're speaking about people's head, you're speaking about what makes them advantageous, and what makes them advantageous makes them distinctive. It makes them different. And in Haminyan, the phenomenon of count, Moire Shakulam Shavim, indicates that they're all exactly the same because it's Beis HaMikdash Shav. Everyone is the same number. A yadlik, like the Frierdiker Rebbe says. As far as numbers are concerned, there's no difference in head and feet. Harekulam Nimnim B'Shavu, all counted the same. In this case, even though there's 10 categories of Jews, by counting them Nimnim B'Shavu, they become the same. The question is, if you're counting Yidden and reducing them to a place, as that brings in the Sichas from the Shalah and Chelik Beis and Chelik Dal and Bamidbar, that you raise Yidden to a place, where they're all either on the lowest level or on the highest level, where they're all equal, why do you mention Reish? Not Reish. Now, the Rebbe doesn't answer this question explicitly, but I think he answers it implicitly, and it's on page 123 where I made the number 13 that I wrote that is rasen shalamayla miseichel madreges meishes rasen shalamayla mitam v'das medide v'gbal tam v'das v'chachpel b'haseichel. That's what kitis hasreish means. Not he's counting our heads, he's raising us to a madrega which is higher than Chabad. In Chabad there's a difference between one Yid and another. In Ratzon, in Das Elyon, there is no difference. So Faket, Kitisas Reish, you're taking this in the Yid, which separates one Yid from another, and because Moshe Rabbeinu is doing the counting, and the Koyach of this comes from Das Elyon, is raising us to a place where all the Roshim are the same. So the Kash is a Teretz. The Reish Taka shows them the differences between one Yid and another. But Tisas Reish means you're neutralizing them by raising them to the Madrege, which is higher than Reish. And that's the answer to the third question. So these three questions the Rebbe answered well, right? Why it says Kitisa Lashon Yachid, why it says Kitisa rather than another word which means minyan, and why it says Reish. And all the three come down to the Teichen of this Maimah, since Moshe Rabbeinu has to do it himself, and he's raising them to a place where there's no Shaychas Terah whatsoever, and he's raising them to a place which, since it's above their Chabad, they're all equal. But the fourth question the Maimah doesn't answer, which is frustrating. That's number 14. Gam Tzarech Lahav, and let's read it. It says in the pasuk Machatzis HaSheekl, you give half a shekel. The Kivan Shem Vayakheil is Esrim Geira Shekel. The pasuk says that a shekel is 20 geira, and they have to give a half of it. It shouldn't have said Esrim Geira. Hayet Tzarech Loi Mash Yitnu Eser Geira. You should give only 10. Relay Machatzis HaSheekl. In other words, what's the point of saying both things, Machatzis HaSheekl, and then telling you that a shekel HaShalom is Esrim Geira, and then you have to give half of that? Say Lechatchila Eser Geira. Don't say Machatzis. By saying Eser, you're not indicating halfness, which is a chasaron. You're indicating wholeness, because the number 10 represents wholeness. Like it says in Kama Makamis in footnote 8 is the number of Mara Makamis. The number 10 denotes wholeness. Why does the Torah have to tell that they have to give Machatzis HaSheekl? Since the Torah is intent on telling you that a whole shekel is Esrim, it would have been far better just to say Eser Geira. Moreover, by saying Machatzis HaSheekl, not only are you losing the opportunity to point out that the gift that you have to give has the shleimus of Eser, you're pointing out a chesaron that's Hebech Mizeh Machatzis HaSheekl, which is Hebech in shleimus. So the Rebbe says, if you would only say Machatzis HaSheekl, no. But since you're also explaining what a Machatzis HaSheekl is, by first explaining what a shekel HaShalom is, and then saying that half of that is Eser Geira, skip the Machatzis, because Machatzis is a chesaron and Eser is a mile. Now this kasha doesn't have a teretz. But I suggested that perhaps it's connected with what the Rebbe said 12 years later in the Maimon of Memches during Shiva, that the Machatzis HaSheekl is the neshama, and the Machatzis HaSheekl is the guf, and Tchias HaMeisim is rejoining them, which is connected to the idea that Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to Shabbos, that now he's connected to Shabbos because of Tzaddik Adin, Tzedkos Tzedek. Even though the Stalkos of a Tzaddik is a very big union, but he's separated from the guf, and Asad Loved, the Tzedkos Tzedek turns around and it becomes Hateva Meitiv. So you're saying Machatzis HaSheekl to indicate that it's going to become whole again. Shtei Chatzoi Tzuros are going to become whole again. But I just made this up. I have no source for this, and honestly I didn't think about it because I prepared. It came to me as I was talking. So that's the fourth question that Bepashtas doesn't have an answer, and I'm giving you an answer. Question 5. The very end of the first paragraph on page 121. This is applied to everybody who's Eiver al Kudim. Now, literally, Eiver al Kudim means going through the count, but the Rebbe talks to Eiver al Kudim, those who did Averis. Lechaper al nafshei seichem. So, what is the pshat? Eiver al Kudim, lechaper al nafshei seichem. So, the Rebbe mentions Eiver al Kudim in the beginning of the middle paragraph on page 122. But the lechaper al nafshei seichem is on page 124, the end of the first paragraph. Zeu masher kosev lechaper al nafshei seichem shleimus hakapara boy lekapura yadei nitim in a lichlach shleimus abi lechaper al nafshei seichem means you're raped up to a madrege where not only you have no shaychas to aveda at all, but the aveda that you did becomes a part of that achtos shleimus abi l'sapach hasheichel l'neched. And we continue going back to the questions. Next paragraph. Number 16. Yes, the Kashas and Mavur, but the Rosh Hashanah say that Kitisa is connected to Vayakheil. Just like by Kitisa, there's a Shaila of why it says Lashon Yachid. But Vayakheil is the same Shaila. Hadiyaku b'shavah. Tis hadiyaku. In the words Kitisa, the question that the Morim asked, and that we learned the answer to, is that Tzarech li'esaydei Meisha Dafka only Meisha can count the Yidden, like it says Kitisa v'leisa'u. The same is true Vayakheil Meisha. The Shaila is Hayat Tzarech Loima Tzarech li'esaydei Meisha Dafka only Meisha could collect the Jewish people. Top of 122 now. The case where the Jewish people collected themselves plurally. What's the Vayakheil Meisha Dafka? And what's the teretz? The teretz is the number 16, which is on page 123, near the end of the first paragraph. Vayakheil Moshe, and Moshe mamsheh b'chinas das elyon, and it comes down into the divlev until Maaseh, and through this bavor and shem makam laveda shleimus habirur. Only Moshe could do it. Just like the suas by Moshe Rabbeinu, only Moshe could do the Vayakheil, because Vayakheil is the same thing. He's raising us to a place of achdos where we have no shaychus to chet lashon chasadim whatsoever, and moreover, it's this Machatzis HaSheekl and Nehera and the shleimus habirur l'chaper al nafshei. Now, the next 3 questions we're going to read successively, and then we'll look at the answers. Okay, V'eid. Now that the Rebbe mentioned Vayakheil, the Rebbe has 3 questions on the Vayakheil. Number 1, the whole business of collecting Jewish people is a redundancy. Why? Mefarshim asked this question. Footnote 13 is mitzayin to the Alshich. Why does it say in this case Vayakheil? Because we know that kol hatzivoyim neme b'kol. Anytime Moshe spoke to the Jewish people, he first collected them. So why does it have to say over here Vayakheil? Uven gamkin, it's self-understood, just like all the other instructions in the Torah. Moshe first gathered the Yidden and then he spoke to them. So it would be self-understood that here also, before he gave them the Zeh HaDavar of Shabbos and the Mishkan, he would have first collected them. He should have immediately beginning with the instructions. Why does it say Vayakheil? There's a movement which indicates to Mashakos of Vayakheil Moshe, the fact that over here it says Vayakheil, and not every place else. It's Eine Akdama. It's not only an introduction, Mishvilat Tzivuyim, which is going to come later, but rather that you have to say Vayakheil here, because Vayakheil, the gathering of Yidden, is not a means to an end, it's the end. In other words, Zeu Inyan, 5 lines into page 122, Zeu Inyan Naila B'fnei Yatzmei. The gathering of a Yidden in this case, to give them the instructions of the Machatzis HaMishkan, and before that Shabbos, is something very high by itself. And then in addition to the Vayakheil, he gave them commandments, but the Vayakheil is an Inyan by itself. Just like by Chitisa, the Inyan Chitisa is B'nei Yisrael Inyan Naila B'fnei Yatzmei, the raising of the Jewish people into the unto itself. Even though the fact was that they gave a Machatzis HaSheekl and they were counted, but the Chitisa means something else. So Vayakheil doesn't mean you're gathering to give them instructions, you're gathering them to give them Das Elyon. Kitisa doesn't mean you're raising them up in order to tell them to count one another, but give them Das Elyon. And then comes Bazunda de Tzivuyim. Another thing which constant about Vayakheil and Kitisa, the Inyan Vayakheil called as B'nei Yisrael was Anashim Noshim V'Taf. Everybody. Like Hakhil. They were all equal. Now this is a very big tzaddik in Gadol. You know why? Because Vayakheil was only men from 20 to 60. I'm sorry, Kitisa is only men from 20 to 60. Vayakheil is men, women, and children. I don't know how to reconcile this. But the point is that just like Vayakheil, the men, women, and children are equal. The Kitisa, all Yidden are equal. That's why you have Machatzis HaSheekl, Ha'ashal Yarbe, V'adal Yamit. In addition, another thing that you call about it, Vayakheil is Akdama for Nidvas HaMishkan, and Kitisa is Akdama for giving the Machatzis HaSheekl to build Adonim, which is Cholos Binyan HaMishkan. Moreover, K'mekein Mesupa Ahakach Pashas Kitisa is Binyan HaMishkan, that both Pashas are about the Beis HaMikdash. So all of these questions that correlate Vayakheil and Kitisa are saying what? That when it comes to building the Mishkan, all the Yidden are equal, and that it involves an act that only Moshe Rabbeinu could do. And the explanation which the Maimer gives, and again, if you look in your text, the 17 is the middle paragraph on 122 into the last paragraph of 122, which spills over to 123, is that when it comes to the Mishkan, since it's a correction of a chet egel, it requires Moshe Rabbeinu. And the final point is Ve'ed Nekuda D'Shneim Kitisa Vayakheil Shabbos. But Vayakheil says right away Shabbos, and Kitisa, whenever you mention the Beis HaMikdash, you mention Shabbos. And the Rebbe just told us why. Because Shabbos is the end of the whole creation. And the Beis HaMikdash is the end of the whole creation after a chet, which is even higher than that. Okay, sometimes I prepare a maimet, I teach a maimet, and I feel like I don't know it. I feel like I habe es verstanden. Ich meine, kein Yeshen HaMetzias ist nicht keine gute Sache zu sein, but L'cheire habe ich sie begeben richtig. L'cheire. Okay, a guten Shabbos. And zu sein bei allem gute Freilich auf den Herzen. We're going this week to put him cotton. And it's 30 years ago this week that the Rebbe said that gave us the Maimon about the Tetzaveh. Rabbi Marla told the Rebbe right after Shiva. The Shiva ended on Tuesday. Chavtes Shvat. So the Rebbe got up after Shachris. And after Mincha, the women, the Sheikh Abad made a Haskalah of a Sefer Torah. And the Rabbanim gave the Rebbe a psak, and Mashiach should come. that the Rabbanim say Mashiach darf kommen. And Rabbi Marlo Zechrein Levracha told the Rebbe, soll sein Vayata Tetzave, when alle wissen wer der Vayata is. Heintige Pajach Vayata Tetzave, so Makuyim werden der Bepel Vayata Tetzave, beteven nida vanigla lamata masala tfacham be'el mazeh ha'maise be'his galus mamish.